Okay, we are on Daf Tes Zayin Amud Aleph, learning as a schus for Shlema for the Ilana Chaya Baserach. We'll buy the two dots about 10 lines from the bottom. Einin. So we had a listing in the Mishnah of all the people who passel their carbon. So the Gemara asks, where do we know that an Einin is someone who had a mace, that was mace loy mace, a carve was passed away before the Kfura? Where do we know that his avodah passels a carbon? So Gemara G'chsivim in Hamikdash lo yetzev leyichal. It says the Gabi the Kohen Gadol that he shouldn't go out of, if he has a mace, he shouldn't go out of the Beis Hamikdash, and he shouldn't be mechal. Ha'acha shelo yotzachilo. It's mashma only the Kohen Gadol who, when he becomes a einin, he doesn't leave the Beis Hamikdash, and he's not mechal. He's not going to, when he does the avodah, he's not going to be mechal. But someone else who stays and does the avodah, he is mechal the Beis Hamikdash. Rabbi Elazar, that's the first source. Rabbi Elazar mehach, he says from here, Hey nekrivo ani hikraft. This is by the parsha of Aaron HaKohen. Aaron HaKohen by the Chanukas Habayis, the last day of the Chanukas Habayis, a fire came down and killed his two sons. Nadav Avihu, and he became an einin. And there was a question. They went and they took the karbonos, the chatas that had already, the avodah had been done. They had already been zayrik the dam of that carbon. And now they took, instead of bringing it in and giving it to the Kehanim to eat, they instead burnt it. They said, we can't go weiter with this carbon. And there was a discussion going on between Aaron and Moshe about whether that was the right thing to do, to dispose of the carbon of the chatas by burning it. So Aaron said to Moshe, are these was it my sons, not the sons who died, but the other two sons who are not Kehanim Gedolim, were they the ones who were makravit as Eininim? No, Ani crafty. I was one who was makravit. I'm the Kohen Gadol, and the avodah of a Kohen Gadol is kosher on he can do the avodah. Mechlal, but the mashmois from that is the inu akriv. If the sons are the ones who had done it, shaper ishtarf. It was proper to burn it because it was taka mechulul. They ruined the carbon. They were not kosher to do the carbon because they were einin. So that's where they dashed from the fact the pasuk of Veidaber Aaron and Moshe hein hayoim hikrivu es chatasan. I was the one who was makar of the carbon, but not my sons because they were einim and they couldn't. So you see that einin is who does the avodah is mechal. In fact, the Gemara of Elazar my time Amar miumina mikdash lo yetze. Why does Rabbi Elazar learn from this story of Moshe and Aaron and his sons? Why did he learn from the original pasuk min hamikdash lo yetze v'leichal? Amulach miksev ha'acha shel yotzachilo. It says the Kohen Gadol can't leave he doesn't go leave the Beis Hamikdash, and if he doesn't avoid it, it's not machal. But it's not mashma that if someone else does it, it is machal. Just saying that this is the din of the Kohen Gadol. V'idach, my time elama mehenik krivu. And according to that first pshat said in Hamikdash, why doesn't he say, you learn it out from Aaron, that Aaron had said that I was the one who did the avodah, not you? Kasavam netuma nisrfa. He says that there's a whole different explanation of what was going on. The reason why they had to burn the carbon was not because it was done as an avodah by an einin, by the sons, but rather it was because that it was brought betuma. It became tameh. The carbon became tameh, and therefore it had to be nisraf. So that was not when Aaron said hein hikrivu. He's saying that I brought it properly, that and he says this is the reason why it was burnt. It was burnt because it became tamei after I did the avodah, but and there wasn't any mistake. There was nothing wrong with the fact that it was burnt. It was burnt because it became tamei. The Be'er Rabbi Shmuel Tana. So these are the first two options of where we would learn out that an einin who does avodah passes the avodah. The Rabbi Shmuel Tana, the Rabbi Shmuel learns it out from a different place. Asher b'kal v'chami b'malmum. You can learn out an einin doing avodah passes the carbon from a kal v'chami from a balmum. Uma balmum sha'oichel. Certainly a balmum, a kain who's a balmum, is allowed to eat from the carbonis. Im avad chila, but a kain who does avodah is mechalel the carbon. Einin she'ein eichel, an einin who is not allowed to eat. Any dim she'im avad chila, it's a kal v'chaimer that if he does the avodah, it's going to be mechal. Zak Gemara mal balmum shechein also by craven kamakriven. Says no, you can't bring a raya, can't make a kal v'chaimer from a balmum to an einin. Balmum has another chumrah that it's not just doesn't just apply to the kain, it also applies to the carbon. If the animal is a balmum, it's possible for a carbon. So it has a chumrah, which is no such thing as a animal that's an einin. You know, if the animal's mother died that day, it has no idea. It doesn't even know what's going on with its family. So I'm just including that because obviously that's ridiculous. Zar yoichiach. So Gemara says, let's learn out from a zar. The isser of a zar to eat, to do avodah. So Gemara mal zar shechen ein loy takana. Now you can't learn out from that, which is zar can't do. It passes a carbon because the zar is more chamer in the sense that if someone is zar, he can't become a kain. There's no such thing. A zar is a zar for life, permanent. So the balmum yachich. So we'll learn that. But balmum is someone has a takana. If he becomes ois balmum, if his broken leg heals, he's not a balmum anymore. And I can do the avodah. But chazar adin leroy zek roy zev leroy zek roy zev. We said about a balmum that it applies also to the animals, but zar doesn't apply to the animals. No such thing as there's no concept of zar versus kain by animals, and balmum, even though it's permanent. Even though zar is permanent, balmum is not permanent. So b'chazadin l'roi zekaroi zev l'roi zekaroi zeh tzadashava shebehen shein muzarin. Both of them, there's azhara that they can't do the avodah v'im avdu chila afani evi einan shemuzar. There's also an azhara for an aina not to do the avodah, so we'll also say, since there's an azhara not to do the avodah, if he does it, it's going to be mechal. Bim avad chil. They want to ask, heichon muzar. You're jumping. We're trying to prove that a einin who does the avodah ruins the avodah. He's mechalet, he passes the carbon. But we're accepting that there is an azhara, that the Torah told you he shouldn't do the avodah. So Zokamara, where do we see that he's not allowed to do the avodah? If you'll say it comes from the earlier pasuk that we had brought, right? We had said first two possible psukim. We'd come to the conclusion you can learn out from Mina Mikdash Yetze, from the story with Aaron and his sons. So you say maybe that's just that you get an azhara from there, and then we use a kal v'chaimer to tell you that it's going to passel. It's not just an azhara. You can't do it, but it's also that if you do it, it's going to passel. If an einin does the avodah, he's going to passel the carbon. So the pasuk of Mina Mikdash, the pasuk of Mina Mikdash Lo Yetze, it says Lo Yichales Mikdashi. It says chilul. It says that he's mechal, that he ruins it. So if there's an azhara, it also includes a chilul. So what do you need this kal v'chaimer for? We're trying to supply a din that it passels, that it's mechalal, but the pasuk itself that you're using as azhara, once you bring the earlier pasuk, you don't need the kal v'chaimer anymore. Ela meheni krivu, or maybe it comes from that second pasuk that we said from Aaron, that he said that I was the one who brought the carbon, and I'm an einim, but I'm the kain gadol, so that's the reason why it's mutter. But if my sons who were not kehanim gedolim did it, they would have been mechal. The kasavam ne'anidas nisrfa.
and we hold not like we had tried to be madcha before. The reason why the other mandama didn't say that pasuk is because he says they became the reason why they burnt it was because of tumah, not because of uncleanness. But maybe we're going according to the pshat before that said that we're going because of this pasuk of Aaron and it's because of uncleanness. I could still say a kasha that you try to learn from Balmum, and so okay. So this is Ella. You can learn that from this pasuk, but still we have a kasha on the original Kal V'Chaimer, right? We wanted to say a me'atzad from Balmum and from Zar. I could say there's a chumrah of Balmum and Zar over Einan that we're trying to learn out from it. Malatzad shavash behen shechen lehutrim meklali. A Balmum and a Zar, they don't have an exception to their rule. A Zar is always asked to do the Avaida, and a Balmum is asked to do the Avaida. But an Einin, there's a heter. A Kain Gadol is Hotram Miklala. He's an exception to the rule that an Einin can't do Avaida. So you see that. So even though we see that a Zar and a Kain and a Balmum who do Avaida are going to be possible, we can't learn out Einin from them because Einin has a kula that it's Hotra Legabi a Kain Gadol. So tomorrow Tamei Yechiach, I'll throw in a third source. A Tamei is also to do Avaida. And a tame has exceptions. That means a tame can be a tame can do avoda. It could do a carbon tzibur, as we're going to see later on in the Masechta. This psukim, a pasuk that tells you a tame who does the carbon tzibur, he doesn't pass the avoda. So tomorrow malatame. So you want to learn that from tame malatame shechem tama. Toma has a separate chumrah. Maybe that's the reason why it's pasal's avoda, because it's metama others. Not someone who is tame. Not only is he tame and he has his isurim, what he can't do, he makes others tame as well. So okay, so you say tame has a chumrah, but what about balmum and zar? They don't have the ability to make others as a balmum or a zar. B'chazar adin, so we can make it with an atzad. Hatzad is from between Tamei and Balmum and Zar. Hatzad shalosh behen shemuzharin. They all are muzar to that you shouldn't do it. You can't bring a carbon when you're a Tamei or Balmum or a Zar. So I'll tell you, you can't bring you can't bring a carbon. There's also azhara, like we said before, for an einin, and we'll learn it out from them. So I'll make you a ma'atzad from the Tamei. We could ask a kasha on this ma'atzad from Tamei Balmum and Zar. They all have something in common. None of them are hotter legabe the kain gadol. Even though Tamei is hotra legabe a carbon tzibur, but it's not. There's no hotter legabe a kain gadol. Like hotra b'kol it's a kain gadol be carbon yachid. A kain gadol is not hotter to bring tuma by a carbon yachid. He can do a carbon tzibur, but he can't do a carbon yachid. It's not worse than every other kain. So Gemara shem tuma mia ishteroi. Gemara says, okay, I don't care. It doesn't. You're pointing out that a kain gadol has a heter that it's. I'm sorry, Einin has a heter that it's hotter legabe kain gadol by carbon yachid, which by tamei there's no heter for carbon yachid, but there still is a hotra miklali legabe tuma that it's hotter in general for a yachid for a kain to do kavanas tzibur. Okay, so that's the Gemara's teretz. So this is so going to get to a fourth. We already said three sources for where we see that an einin is machal. The first were the first two psukim, and then the third was from the Kal V'Chaim. Rashashi Ama, he says, Asher Kal V'Chaim miyoshev. I'll bring a Kal V'Chaim, and not like we said from Balmum and Zar and Tuma, but rather from a yoshev, someone who's sitting and does avoda.
passel the avodah. Someone who's sitting a kohen who's sitting is allowed to eat the kachim. Im Ovid chil, but if he does the avodah in chal, einen she'ena oichel, an einen who can't eat, einen dim shem Ovid chil, certainly if he does the avodah, he's going to be mechal. So the Mali Yosef she'chein passel le'edus. This is very similar to the limud we had before from Rav Mesharshia when we were learning out, I think, Zar. It's like the Mali Yosef she'chein passel le'edus. Miyushav. I'll tell you, no. Yoshev has a chumrah that someone who's sitting, in addition to passeling a carbon, he also is pasel edis. Like let's bring a right from Yoshev Talmud Chacham. Talmud Chacham who's Yoshev is allowed to eat kachim, but he'll still passel if he does avodah. Doesn't help him that he's Talmud Chacham, but he's allowed to say edus while he's sitting. So you can't ask that chumrah. You can't say that that's a pircha on the Kal V'Chaimer. So Gemara Mal Shem Yoshev Chen Pasal Edus. So Gemara says no. He says back. It doesn't make a difference that there is a case of a Talmud Chacham that could say edus sitting, but generally the Shem Yoshev is Pasal Edus. I'm sorry, a Talmud Chacham is just an exception. So Gemara Shem Yoshev Le Parach. So he says, I'm not masking to that kasha from Shem Yoshev. L'maisa, there's an individual case where we find that a Yoshev is going to be mutter to say edus. So you can ask a pircha from there. The imtim salem parach. And if you'll insist that you're right, that it is a pircha from the Shem Yoshev, then if I have to, I'll resort to making a tzara shava with one of the things that we mentioned before, either balmum or tameh, or what was the other one? Zar, I think. Balmum. Sorry, balmum, and yeah, Zar, yeah, and Tom.
No, how can a Kohen who's a Tomei do a korban tzibur? I mean, he can't go into the mikdash.
He can't go in, but if he's there, it's not. We're not saying he's allowed to, but if he did the avodah, it doesn't passel it.
So even though he's chayav chorus for being there,
it could be it was a shaygig. He didn't know about it.
Mm-hmm.
But even if he was chayiv chorus, it's
irrelevant.
I mean, this is a. We're going to have a lot of. This is not a. What do you call it? It's a very well-known fact. It comes up a lot. Let me see if I can find the Rashi. Where do we see that? Where do we come across this? I know we just said this. Right, that's where it is. Let's see, where's the Rashi? Shem Tumo, Shem Tumo Miya History. Could go in Betzibur. Hilkach La Perchiv. Ikasha Lomli Lameimish Tami. Yeah. Rashi says it doesn't say where it comes from.
Go walk around.
Yeah. Tami Yechich Shotim Mikol Eitzel Carbon Tzibur Dechsiv B'moyadai. Bafilu B'tuma. The Torah says B'moyadai that you have to bring the Carbonus Tzibur B'moyadai at the proper time, and even if the person is Tami. But if he does it with carbon yachid, he's machal. I think, I don't know, we'll get to this, we'll get more into the detail of this. I know that there's the tzitz is maratza on on the carbon, the dam itself becoming tameh. And then we learn out from the Mayadai that if I think it means even if there's no Kehanim and the only Kehanim available, I don't know. This is the second time you asked me a question about going into the Beis Hamikdash. You asked about also the Zar going into the Beis Hamikdash. I think the Zar can go into the Chatzar. I don't think there's a restriction on him going into the Chatzar. It's just into the Heichel that he can't go in.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think the area, not the Chatzar, the Heichel. You're saying a Kayin can't go in, so how could he do the Avaida? I guess he could do it by Obama, where there's no Beis Hamikdash. Maybe that'll be an example, but I don't know. But I would think, like I said, it could be, we're talking about whether it passels the carbon, which is a different question about whether you can go there and do it. Sagt the Gemara right. Einen passel. So we just brought the source that einen who does avoid this passel. Now I'm going to talk about some of the details of this. Amar Rav, lo shanu ela b'carbon yachid. This din that we said that an einen who does the avoida passels it, that's only on a carbon yachid. But carbon tzibur miratza. But if he did a carbon tzibur, it's still going to be a kosher carbon. We say kavachayim mituma. We make a kavachayim from tuma. What's the aleph? Uma tuma shuli hotra maklala etzel kayin gadol. The carbon yachid. Tuma, that a kayin gadol cannot bring a carbon yachid betuma. He could bring it just like any kayin. He could bring it a carbon siver, but a carbon yachid he can't bring. Hotra etzel hedyet the carbon siver. But like we just were talking about, a kayin hedyet can bring a carbon siver while he's tamei. Anina shehotra meklala etzel kayin gadol b'carbon yachid. A kayin gadol can bring a carbon yachid, like we've said. We're assuming at this point that the kayin gadol, when he becomes the din that we said that a kayin gadol who's an einin can do avodah, is referring to both the carbon tzibur and a carbon yachid. So any din shehotra etzel kayin hedyet b'carbon tzibur, l'chayra it should be the tuma should also the aninas should be mutter for a kayin hedyet by a carbon tzibur. Right? If a kayin hedyet is hutter, it's allowed to do a carbon tzibur betuma, and he can't do a ba'aninas, and aninas is hutter for a kayin gadol, legabe a kayin gadol for carbon yachid. So certainly, there's no heter for the kayin gadol to do tuma. So again. We're trying to prove that einen is going to be mutter for a carbon tzibur, and we bring a raya from tuma. That tuma, which is not mutter for the kayin gadol for a carbon yachid, it's still mutter for kayin hedyet for tzibur. Aninas shehotra mikol etzel kayin gadol b'carbon yachid. Aninas, which a kayin gadol is allowed to do. Ein edin shehotra etzel kayin hedyet b'carbon tzibur. Certainly, aninas l'chayra is more kal than tuma, in that a kayin gadol has a heter for it, and the kayin gadol has no heter for tuma biyachid. So certainly, aninas will be mutter for a carbon tzibur for a kayin hedyet. Maskef lo Rava Bar Yiloi. Rava Bar Yiloi asks the kasha. If you're going to say this kal v'chaimer, I'm going to say a bunch of other kal v'chaimers you can make, which come to conclusions that are contradictory. He says, if you're going to make this kal v'chaimer, let's make another kal v'chaimer, like toiser aninas etzel kayin gadol b'carbon yachid. Let's say, not like you had just assumed that a kayin gadol is going to be aser is going to be mutter. We just assume that Kohen Gadol. We said he's mutter to do avoda, and he's not going to passel a carbon when he does the baninas, both a carbon tzibur and a carbon yachid. Maybe we'll say faket. We'll say a carbon yachid. He is going to passel when he does avoda baninas. Mikal v'chaymer uma tuma shehutra etzel kohen hedjit betzibur lehutra etzel kohen gadol b'carbon yachid. Madach if tuma, which is hotter for a kohen hedjit to do betzibur, but it's still a kohen gadol can't do it by a carbon yachid. Aninas sheloi hotra etzel kohen hedjit b'carbon tzibur. Aninas, where there's no heter legabi doing aninas for a carbon tzibur for a kohen hedjit. So the it shouldn't be matter a kohen gadol to do avoida to be if he doesn't avoid the baninas for a carbon yachid. And secondly, the toiser tuma etzel kohen gadol b'carbon yachid. I'll make a second kalvachayim. I should be matter tuma for kohen gadol for a carbon yachid. Mikalvachayim. Uma mean aninas shleihut etzel kohen hedjit b'carbon tzibur. There's no heter at all for aninas for a kohen hedjit. Hotra etzel kohen gadol b'carbon yachid, but it's hotra for kohen gadol both for a carbon tzibur and a carbon yachid. Tuma shehotra etzel kohen hedjit b'carbon tzibur. Tuma which is hotra for a kohen hedjit for carbon tzibur, and edin shehotra etzel kohen gadol b'carbon yachid. You should also be able to be matter for tuma for a kohen gadol for a carbon yachid. V'loy taiser tuma etzel, and also we shouldn't be able to be matter tuma for a kohen hedjit carbon tzibur. Let's say the whole din that was saying that tuma is mutter for a kohen hedjit by carbon tzibur. Let's say it should be also. It should passel. If aninas, which is mutter for a kohen gadol by a carbon yachid, lehutra etzel kohen hedjit by carbon tzibur, is not mutter for a kohen hedjit by tzibur. Tuma shel lehutra etzel kohen gadol by carbon yachid, and din shel leitaisa by kohen hedjit by carbon tzibur. So tuma, which is not mutter for a kohen gadol for a carbon yachid, certainly shouldn't be mutter for kohen hedjit for a tzibur. And we know that that's not kavil halacha. The halacha is exactly like the opposite. And we learned that from a pasuk the other way around. That it is. So that heter that the Torah said that for tuma b'tzibur would only be for a kohen gadol, not for a kohen hedjit at all. So all of these different kalvachaymes are going to contradict each other. I'm going to say kohen gadol that it should be matter the tuma of a kohen gadol, then we say no, it shouldn't be that we shouldn't be matter the tuma of a kohen hedjit. So he says you can't elamai. It must be that you cannot apply these kalvachaymes. We have to just accept that when the pasuk tells you, for example, that tuma is chutzra by a yachid b'tzibur, it applies to a kohen gadol as well. And when the Torah tells you that aninas is mutter by a kohen gadol, it applies to all cases of a kohen gadol. It applies to both carbon tzibur and a carbon yachid. And don't make kalvachaymes to limit the extent of what the pasuk was matir or aser. He says, "Ella ikalim mifrachachi." You can ask kashas either way. Kol chada v'chada teiku b'duchta, and therefore you should leave each one as, like we just said, that each limud is going to be a limud that it means it encompasses the entire category, and we don't limit it based on a kal v'chaimer. So therefore, your kasha of saying a pircha from the your kal v'chaimer also that you originally had started with, that Rava wanted to say that it would limit that the Einin is possible is only by a carbon yachid, by a carbon tzibur, a kohen hedjit who does avoida be'aninis is going to be a ratza. He's like, you can't make such a kal v'chaim. So Gemara weiter. Tful yom. We said, let's see, what time is it? 8:25. Okay, since I guess it's not fair, I'm not going to start tful yom on you. I'm not going to start tum on you when we're ready. It's getting late. Okay, we'll stop here.